This first reading says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways." That's really the whole theme of today in these readings. God looks at things in many ways so different than us. And it's important for us to let go of our own particular categories of reasoning, because sometimes we can get stuck in a certain pride and yet not really see as God sees. One of the areas in which we struggle with this is what we could call entitlement. This is a big word, especially in our day and age. And especially in our American consciousness, this is something that we really have ingrained in us and we don't really realize sometimes. I do this amount of work, I get this amount. If someone does less than me, they should get less than me. Did you hear what was happening in the gospel here? Did any of you it kind of hit the wrong way? Because this is so different. This thought pattern of the Lord is so different than our particular way of thinking. You have these guys that are called in to work at this vineyard. And they start early in the morning. They're there in the middle of the day during all of the heat. Remember, this is in the desert, so they're working in the desert. They're burning up in the midst of it. And then the vineyard owner, he just keeps going out and finding more people and more people and more people. And then there's some guys that only work 1 hour when it's cool, after the sun is going down. These guys sneak in and they work for 1 hour. And then they get their pay, but they get a whole day's wage. And so the other guys are thinking, well, I'm going to get more now. And yet they get the exact same. Doesn't that hit you the wrong way to be like, that's bad business? What's going on right here? These guys only worked 1 hour, they should get 1/8 of what the other guys did. So there is this understanding in our own hearts of, I'm owed certain things when I do certain things. And yet what the Lord wants to remind us about is the fact that everything is a gift. And if you really, really look back, there's not much that we can say that actually belongs to us. Think, for instance, we'll take the example of a soccer player, a World Cup soccer player, and imagine that they get really, really pumped up and they say, you know what, this is because of my power, my ability, all that I did with myself. Well, yes, there is certain aspects of freedom and stuff like that that's in there in choosing, but when you really look at all the different opportunities maybe that person had, many of those things are out of their control. They're things that happen to them. Maybe having the right opportunities. Maybe even the very fact that they received from farmers food in order to be able to give their muscles nourishment to actually be able to run. So in a certain sense, the farmers who made the food helped that person be able to start practicing, because if he didn't have that person to rely on, then he wouldn't be able to even run because he would be dead. He wouldn't have any nourishment. And so if we look at our own lives and go back in our history, we'll notice that there are others who have been gifts in our lives that have made us who we are now. And if we go all the way back, we actually end up at God. God gave you your life. God gave you your breath. God gave you your intelligence to be able to do what you're doing. God gave you the opportunities of being able to work where you had worked. God gave you the gift of meeting your spouse, all these different things. And they're things that are not owed to us. Because our life isn't owed to us by God, it's a gift. So we need to rediscover this idea of everything is a gift. And nothing, in a certain sense, is our doing. And it's actually quite interesting when you study, even with like poverty awareness and different things like that. I did this program with some of our high schoolers a little while back, and I had them all line up in the middle of the gym. And I gave them a particular card that gave them a number, or gave them a certain certain things about the kind of person they were going to role play. And then you read these different questions, and the questions would go like this. If your family had more than one car growing up, take 2 steps forward. If your family had to use public transportation because you didn't have enough money to afford a car, take 2 steps backwards. If your family, your parents had a college education, take 3 steps forward. If your parents were not able to graduate high school, take 4 steps backwards. Do you see how all of these different things, you start all of a sudden realizing that there's this huge divide that happens. And the amazing thing about every single one of those questions is that it is outside of that person's choice or ability. They are circumstances that happen outside of that person's control that ultimately put them where they are. All of that is gift. All of that is providence. All of that is different things like that we can't go back and say, well, that's my doing. And yet, what do the workers do in this particular gospel? Those that were called in first. Notice how it's the Lord who called them in. Again, it's a gift to them, saying, hey, I want you to work in my vineyard. They forget that part. It's this total gift of saying, I want you to come and work for me. It's not owed to them. The master actually goes and looks for them. But then they start grumbling. And they forget the very gift that they received to be able to have that job to work. And as I was reading this, there was something that really, really struck me that I encourage you to meditate on, because it changes the whole way of looking at this. The landowner goes out. Around 5 o'clock, he found others standing around and said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? They answered, because no one has hired us. I don't know if you've ever had that experience of being jobless. Of maybe having, I remember seeing many people when I lived in Washington, D.C., and they would wait at the corner of one of the main streets for someone to just drive by and ask them, can they do an odd job? But do you know what that feeling is maybe when you're trying to prepare to provide for your family, and you're looking for a job, and you're looking for a job, and every single time someone passes over you, what does that feel for that person? Do they feel worthless? Do they feel maybe even their sense of dignity of saying, and especially for us guys, this is something that really hits the very identity of being like, I want to provide for my family, and I can't. I just feel weak. I feel powerless, and everyone else seems to go ahead of me, and I'm left out. It's kind of like if you've ever had that experience of someone in the games during elementary school days. Team captains, pick this person, pick this person, pick this person. Have you ever been that person who's the last person? And even that team that has to pick you is like, maybe that person way over there or so. What does that feel like? You feel like a loser. And so these men are waiting the whole day, and maybe people are actually making fun of them. Maybe as people are driving by, they'll be like, wow, those are lazy people right there. They're just sitting around. Why don't they get a decent job or something like that? Many times we can make that kind of judgment, but maybe those people are really, really trying with all of their might, and yet they're just falling into this sense of worthlessness and their own dignity because no one wants them. They always get passed over. Do you see the kindness of this landowner? He comes, he sees them. He hears the fact that everyone else is passing over them. And it's almost the end of the day. It's almost no more point to even be out there. And he says, you too, go and work in my vineyard. And in a certain sense, in giving them the same daily wage, what he's saying is I feel the fact that you've been rejected. I feel the fact that you've gone through, maybe as a father of a family, and everyone else is either making fun of you because you have no decent job and they think that you're lazy. Maybe you're just panhandling. But I see that there's more to you. And I'm willing to give you a day's wage for all the suffering that you went through, just feeling worthless. Do you see how, when the Lord says, are you envious because I am generous? Do you see the great sin of those who were grumbling? First, that they didn't see the gift that they were receiving, but then they didn't understand the suffering of these men who were just sitting out there hurting because everyone was rejecting them. But the landowner saw through all of that and welcomed them. Wouldn't that be beautiful if we actually did that? If we had the same kind of heart that Jesus had for those who are on the fringes, those who are considered the outcasts, those who are considered the ones that maybe are the butt of jokes, and yet maybe they're hurting because everyone passes over them. Will you be like the landowner? Will you reach out, as Pope Francis calls us to the periphery?